Hello and welcome. My name is Ashleigh and I'm delighted to be hosting our very first season of LearnSci Webcasts, a series all about educators helping educators. We've invited university educators to share stories about their own experiences and challenges, along with tips and tricks that you can use in your own teaching. Thank you so much for listening and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to this episode of LearnSci Webcasts. Today we're talking about enhancing lab time and we're joined by Dr Jessica Goodman and Dr Sharon Williams. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves? Jess?
Okay, good afternoon everyone. So I'm Dr Jessica Goodman from the University Centre Shrewsbury, which is actually a satellite campus of the University of Chester. I have been lecturing here since 2019 and I am the programme lead for biotechnology undergraduates.
Brilliant, thank you. Sharon?
Hello, I'm Sharon Williams and I'm assistant professor at Coventry University, and I've been at Coventry University for the last 8 years. I'm also a course director and I teach on various kind of modules in biosciences.
Great, thank you. Welcome to both of you and thank you so much for joining us. So today we're talking about enhancing lab time and making it as valuable as possible for students. Depending on university budgets, laboratory space and capacities, maybe timetable constraints, a student may not get as much time in the lab across the semester of their course. So Jess and Sharon are here today to share their insights into this topic with us and share their thoughts on how labs can be made as efficient as possible, making the most out of that precious lab time. So my first question is, how has the structure of your practical labs changed over the last few years? Sharon, would you like to kick us off with that one?
Okay, so we have, I don't know if it's changed, well, it changed a bit because of the pandemic, of course, but in the sense of in the lab itself, we have a much larger lab right now. We have a super lab. So we moved from one building to another, I think it was in 2017. So we have now a super lab. We can have around 300 students in one go. But when we have our session is for 30 students, usually per 30 students, we have the lecturer and a PhD student. If not, we're trying to have at least 2 people in the lab. So per 15, we have one staff member. And then the lab is around 2 hours and a half. And we used to have paper schedules during the session. Now we have tablets, so we use that instead. And so changing, during the pandemic, we had to do a lot of things online, but now we went back to being in the lab for 2.5 hours. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Jess?
So we've actually had some massive changes in terms of the cohorts that we've been getting in over the years. So we've been used to having perhaps smaller cohorts of perhaps up to 20 students on the undergraduate course. But since the introduction of this new Masters in Biotechnology program that we've started, our lab is actually at full capacity all the time, and sometimes we actually spill over into the other labs. So we've had to get more members of staff in to work on this. We've had to get lab techs in all the time to help us out with this a little bit more. But because obviously we've got this difference in the ratio that's happened over the years, we've had to get really creative with kind of how many groups are working together, how we deliver the protocols, etc. And we've also found that you can't necessarily talk to them as much on an individual basis if there's more of them. So to kind of reduce the anxiety around coming into the lab, we've had to prep everything well in advance so we can deliver all of their practical material before they even set foot in the lab. So we've just had to plan a lot further in advance in order to facilitate the new student numbers.
Wow, that sounds great. Perfect. Okay. So how do you ensure your students have the base level safety and kind of procedural knowledge to work in your lab whilst making the most of that valuable in-person lab time? Jess, do you want to continue that one for me?
Okay, great. So in terms of the base level of knowledge, obviously we do provide lots of material in advance, but one of the things that you can't really replace is reiterating that information face to face. So we give a safety brief every lab session that we provide because you can't necessarily rely on the students to always read the safety brief in advance. We've also started providing more induction material. So every new student obviously gets a much longer induction on what the basic health and safety is. We include things like a COSH quiz because no one really likes to learn about COSH. So we've tried to make it a little bit more exciting by having a quiz, and it gets a little bit competitive. So that kind of helps them with that introduction. But also actually in implementing some of the LearnSci tutorials that you've got online, because then they can actually interact a bit more before they even get into the lab. So they already have an awareness of what we expect at the kind of basic safety level.
Brilliant, thank you. Sharon, is there anything that you do to ensure that safety stuff beforehand?
Yes. So what we started to do since we started using Learning Science is that we use pre-lab activities. So one of the things we've done, I think it's the last 5-6 years, but we're using it. The students are going through the activities and making sure they understand if it's the topic, for example, is PCR. So we're letting them have all those activities or pre-lab opportunities to learn the animation, which is amazing, and understanding what they're going to do in the lab. Of course, preparing them to the lab is going over the schedule, although we tell them to read it in advance. I make sure that in the workshop, we go over what we're going to do in the lab before we get into the lab, which saves us a lot of time, making sure that they know what are the procedures. And then in the lab, we have screens, so we go over the basic health and safety, of course, what needs to be done, gloves, PPE, all that. And then they actually do following the instructions and the procedure and health and safety. And that helps a lot, preparing them before they come to the lab. And if we do sometimes quizzes, just to make sure that they have this basic understanding, help them to follow the instructions better and get better results as well.
Brilliant. And so, Jess, do you also have those pre-lab activities? Are those kind of the COSH quizzes that you mentioned? Are they pre-lab work?
Yes, so that actually forms part of the induction. So every time we get new students in, obviously teaching them basic things like how to use a pipette, but also waste disposal is a big thing that students we did see in the past tended to get a little bit confused about. So we've got quite a big session on where you should put your waste, and then again a bit of a quiz at the end. So you've done this lab practical, where do you put this, etc. So certainly with the lab inductions, and as I mentioned with this new cohort of international master's students, where you generally expect kind of a level of understanding, obviously you can't necessarily assume that. So I've provided lots of additional support sessions to kind of go back over the basics before they actually start some of the bigger practicals.
Brilliant. Thank you. And this question to go to both of you, I suppose, also what kind of, do you do any post-lab work related to kind of help with lab safety as well? Do you kind of go back and look at things? You're both nodding. Sharon, do you want to tell us about any post-labs that we do?
Yes, so we do prepare for them some post-labs. So after especially for labs, we have cloning labs. So we have a series of 3 labs. So each week they come and they do one part of the lab. So by the end of 3-4 weeks, they need to write up a lab report. So once they've done all those labs, to get it reflection on what they've done and how it comes all together, the post-lab works really well. And what I can give them is a formative feedback to see if they understood how to prepare the graphs, did they get good results? If they didn't, what they can do in order to write about it in the discussion. So we prepared those post-lab, which we find it very, the students love that. So this is something we kept for a long time, and we keep using it, and then they get the feedback, and based on that feedback, they write up their lab report at the end and submit it. So yeah, we do use it, and the students like it a lot.
Great, that's fantastic. Jess?
So we usually include kind of a debriefing session after the labs, but what we found over the years is that if a lab isn't necessarily linked to assessment, which we do have quite often, so it's more to enhance learning, we have had to kind of increase the amount of debriefing sessions that we in fact use, with lots of questions and answers. So where do you think this went wrong, if it did, which in a lot of cases it usually does. So where do you think you went wrong in this lab? How could you improve it in future? But also the LearnScis actually do have a lot of the analytical frameworks in place. So for example, how to analyse an agarose gel I gave my students, I think last week. So if they're not necessarily that confident with how they actually analyse their data, there's that additional support available. So they've got the sessions with me. They'll have some supplementary information on their Moodle site, which is the online portal that we use. But also some of the LearnScis have been really helpful in analysing their data.
That's brilliant. That's lovely to hear. And so I suppose the combination of these pre and post labs, do you think now that those are implemented into your courses, that's really going back to kind of the main point of this episode, I suppose, is that enhancing that lab time? Has that now made that lab time much more valuable to you and the students moving forward?
So it absolutely has enhanced the lab time in the sense that, especially with the pre-lab, so when they come into the lab, they're not asking questions that maybe takes away from other students. So for example, if a student has come in with less experience, I might have, if I hadn't have done the pre-labs, I might have had to have sat down with them for a long time and kind of gone through the basics again, which actually takes away from my other students. Whereas if they've all had that pre-lab information, I can assume a knowledge and then we can actually get on with perhaps more complicated analysis. I've actually been able to incorporate more activities in the lab as well. And with the post labs, I know that they've reinforced that understanding. So if it is associated with an assessment, by doing those pre-lab activities, I'm actually enhancing and reinforcing that learning that they've already done.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Okay. Are there any other ways that you make the most of that kind of precious in-person lab time for both the staff and the students? Is there anything else that you're doing additionally that really enhances that time for perhaps you from an educator perspective or the students particularly? Sharon, is there anything else?
Yeah, so we used to use also smart worksheets that you produce during the lab. The advantages, of course, that each student could go in their own pace and just complete the data. We had that with the enzyme kinetics. So they just fill in the data and receive immediate feedback if they are in the right direction, or maybe they should look at the calculations and redo that, or if they're stuck, they can raise their hand and staff can come to them and help them, which was very useful because there were different kind of levels, so that releases a lot of pressure. And especially in the pandemic, where we have to have this distance and making sure that you're not too close to the students and all that, we found the smart worksheets really helpful at that point. So smart worksheets definitely an advantage when you have large groups and everyone works in different pace. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing. And Jess, do you do anything additional to enhance that lab time as well?
Yes, so there's a couple of things. One of the main things that's worked out really well recently is obviously we've been identifying, especially since the pandemic, which I think raised a lot more of the issues that perhaps we hadn't thought about before. There's a lot of student anxiety around going into the lab, perhaps whether it's for the first time or in general. There's a lot of anxiety around breaking equipment, which isn't something I've necessarily considered before, but it has been made clear to me that some of the students do worry about these things. So I've incorporated some anonymous submissions online so they can submit their comments and thoughts and feelings before the lab. So for example, is there anything that you're particularly worried about in this lab? Is there anything you don't understand? And that allows the students that aren't necessarily as confident to put their ideas forward without feeling like they're putting their hand up and everyone's looking at them kind of thing. So we can identify these issues ahead of the lab time so that we're not thinking about it while the lab's actually on. We can also identify any gaps in the knowledge that perhaps we need to fill in before we go into the lab. They get their protocols well in advance, which is also really helpful for students who perhaps have learning difficulties and need to read through that protocol in advance, and again, reducing that anxiety.
I really love your suggestion of kind of your implementation, of allowing the students to submit these kind of worries before the lab. I think that's such a great idea to share, the worries. What do you then do, like practically speaking? So if you get a submission from a student, they say, "Oh, I'm worried that I might break something." Realistically, how do you then stop that happening? Does that make sense?
So we go through kind of what the process will be. So reassure them that accidents happen all the time. Sometimes I'll tell a story about when I was a PhD student. I'm like, here's what I did. That was mad wrong. So you probably won't do that. So kind of just that reassurance. If it's something specific, so for example, I'm really concerned that I need to pipette 2 microliters of solution, and actually I'm really rubbish at pipetting 1,000 microliters, I will go through that with them again, or perhaps put up a few more LearnScis in advance. But it's more about reassuring the students and making sure they know you're listening, and that actually what they do isn't going to be the end of the world, and we can always deal with these things. So
yeah, and about combating that kind of fear of failure as well. It's such a difficult
I think one
thing
of the big
to work
things.
with.
Yeah, I said to one of my students, it was today actually, so something went a bit wrong. And I was like, well, things happen that are wrong all the time. That's just part of science. So reassuring them that is actually a normal thing, but we don't panic. Here's how we deal with it. So particularly in cell culture, for example, if they spill something, I'm like, okay, if we panic, then things are going to go really wrong. So we're going to slow down, we're going to clean up the mess and then carry on. So
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. Okay, so that's the end of my questions. I didn't know if you had any additional questions for each other at all that you'd like to ask and kind of gain insight.
I've got one for Sharon, actually, if that's okay. So obviously we've had this huge intake, which has been quite a shock to us. So we're not used to these big cohorts of students. So I don't know if you have any advice for kind of scaling up the practicals from perhaps, say, 20 students, and now I need to think about double, maybe even triple that in future. So I don't know if you've got any advice for that.
So one of the things that we've done is, you need a bigger lab. So this is why we have the super lab, but that's also a lot of money. I think it's a thing. If you cannot have a bigger lab, then it's just being efficient with your time. So I don't know. We have a 2.5 hours. I don't know how long is your labs? Are your labs?
So we managed to be quite flexible with it. So we just book in the time we need for the lab at the beginning of the year. So it can be all day. Perhaps we have a 2-hour lab. So it's very variable depending on what practical it is.
That's it. So if you can be more efficient with your time, maybe, then you can have them in smaller groups and be just efficient with the time. So we have like 3 labs a day of 2.5 hours. So we have 9:30 to 12, and then we have half an hour break, and then 12:30 to 3, and then 3:30 to 6. So we have 3 labs that we can have them in during the day. So I think if you do a whole day for 20 students, it kind of takes the whole, the space. Yeah. So if you be more efficient with the space and the time, I think you can get more students through the day. And of course, if they are prepared, then it's quicker than if they don't know what they're doing and you need to spend the time and like half an hour explaining what needs to be done, health and safety, and then they do the lab, and then if they stay after for the calculation, that can take longer. So things you don't need to do in the lab, just don't leave them in the lab. Okay. Do a different session.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really insightful. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Jess and Sharon, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences and insights into the topic. It's been great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Jess.
Nice to meet you.
So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so tweet us at LearnSci HQ with any comments on today's episode or anything you'd like to hear from us in the future. Thank you so much. Bye.